Time to check out a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 5. Author, Grant Michaels. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1996. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 20. Ross left at sunrise the next morning. An hour later, I got up and showered and shaved. As I was leaving the guest house for breakfast, I heard a faint buzz among the staff about how much money Ross had got from me that time. Apparently, he had flashed the bills before everyone's eyes on his way out, proving to them that our supposed love affair was over, and it was cash only, between the widow Kraychik and the town hustler. The staff never knew that Ross returned the money at our next meeting, our own little recycling program. On my way to town, I passed by the Fleming Lemming. That morning it was Joshua who sat outside, smoking and having a cup of coffee. Unlike Laura, the previous day, he was not reading a book. I waved to him. He didn't wave back. Instead, he muttered, "Thanks for telling my wife what was none of her business or yours." I asked him to explain. He said, "How did Laura know I was out with Nancy Drew last night when I don't recall telling her myself? You're the only person who saw me at the Javelin." "There were hundreds of people there," I said. "Maybe next time you can keep your big mouth shut." "Maybe next time you won't jump to conclusions." I asked Joshua how he liked driving Edsel Sham's personal pink taxicab. "Where'd you get that idea?" he said. "I guessed it all by myself." "Maybe you guessed wrong," said Joshua. "And what does it matter, even if I am driving for him? Everyone's just trying to make a living down here. We're not all rich like you. Most of us need more than one job to get by. Like your friend Ross." "Is that what it is with you and Nancy Drew?" I said. "A job?" Joshua narrowed his eyes. "Why don't you just forget you ever saw us?" "That almost sounds like a threat." "It's friendly advice," said Joshua. I said, "But Nancy Drew doesn't seem like your type. I mean, romantically." "And what's my type?" he said. "Someone meek and submissive, like Laura." Joshua sniggered. "Shows what you know about people." So then, what is your job with Nancy Drew? Is it connected to the Peter Willits estate? I know she's directly involved with that." "No kidding," said Joshua. "She's the executor." "What about Mindful Lotus?" Joshua bristled. "Will you forget about that?" "Why?" I said. "Are you afraid I might discover the real connection between them and you?" "What is their business anyway? Property management? Or is it more specialized? How about stolen property management? Is that what Mindful Lotus does?" "It's property systems development," said Joshua. "It's a new concept in real estate. A stroke of genius. It's so simple. Mindful Lotus matches available property to the most appropriate buyer." "Sounds like a dating service." Joshua said, "Someone like you would think like that." "What do you get out of it, Joshua?" "A guaranteed cut of the tourist bookings on the properties." "That would help your ailing finances at the Fleming Lemming." Joshua flung his coffee toward me, but I moved quickly and the stream of hot liquid just missed me. "People like you are a pain in the ass," he said. "I try being friendly with you, but it doesn't work." "Maybe you don't try hard enough." He got up and went inside. I continued walking down Fleming Street toward Duval, and along the way, I felt an odd sensation through the ground at a regularly spaced interval every few seconds. The island's coral foundation pulsed slightly with a thump, followed closely by the sound of metal colliding against metal far in the distance. Thump, clink, thump, clink. As I followed the vibrations and the sounds to their source, the two sensations occurred more closely together. Thump, clink, thump, clink. The epicenter of the activity turned out to be the parking lot behind the Gulf Coast Playhouse, down by the southwest shore of the island. There was a small crowd of people watching what was probably the only unbelievable sight in Key West. Sometime during the night, A fleet of giant construction equipment had arrived, and that morning it was driving metal piles deep into the fragile reef. From what little I knew about marine ecology, that kind of mistreatment could destroy the reef, which is why such construction was absolutely prohibited on Key West. It would take a development company with cosmic clout to bypass the severe building restrictions that protected the reef. A development company would need unimpeachable power, a power of quasi-religious proportions, perhaps requiring even a lofty name, something like Mindful Lotus. Close to the construction site was a stockpile of materials that looked like the prefabricated components of some kind of huge galvanized steel structure. From where the pilings were being driven, it looked as though it was to be erected in the parking lot between the Gulf Coast Playhouse and the shoreline. To my wild imagination, it almost looked like the makings of an airplane hangar. The Gulf Coast Playhouse was being transformed into something very different. Ken Kimball and Edsel Sham were among the crowd, both of them shaking their heads lamentably. I went and asked if they knew what was going on. Edsel yelled above the noise, "Looks like someone got approval for a multi-story parking lot." Ken added, "This will destroy the reef." Meanwhile, the machinery continued its relentless task, thumping and clinking its way through the delicate, balanced ecology of a live coral reef. "What about the playhouse?" I said. "They haven't started work on that yet," said Edsel. I asked the two men if they knew who'd hired the contractors. They were blank-faced, as though I'd asked if they wet their toothbrush before or after putting on the toothpaste. I said, "Someone is paying them." "You're right," said Edsel. "We should find out." Ken said, "I'm going to town hall and get to the bottom of this. This is a disgrace." Ken turned and headed toward his car, a bright red Range Rover. It looked familiar, as if from some recent dream, by the shine of the paint and the glint of the alloy wheels and the dense, spongy black of the safari gray tires. The vehicle looked brand new. Perhaps Madison Avenue had embedded an image of the thing in my subconscious as the perfect suburban transport for a queen, since a recent ad had called the car Her Majesty's Country Carriage, but I'd seen it sometime currently in real life. Edsel said to me, "I'd better go with Ken. We're in this together." "And what?" I said. "Trying to save the playhouse and the reef." "You'd better hurry," I said. He ran after Ken and got in the car with him, and they drove off to make a noise at Town Hall. They'd have to stamp their feet awfully loud to compete with the pile driver's villainous work. I suspected Mindful Lotus was behind the work, so I decided to confront Nancy L. Drew about it. For that, I needed my car. So I headed back to the Jared Bellamy house, picked up the Alpha, and drove to the attorney office. Not surprisingly, the receptionist told me it would be impossible to see Nancy Drew without an appointment. I said, "Why don't you tell the revered attorney that Stan Kraychik has been mucking around in a lotus pond and he stumbled on a pile driver?" The receptionist looked at me dubiously, but made the call. Nancy Drew agreed to see me. "Well, well," she said as I entered her office. "It seems you've been putting your nose in places you shouldn't be." "It's the only way to find the truffles," I said. The culinary reference was wasted on her. "Exactly how much do you know?" she said. "I know there's a construction crew at the Gulf Coast Playhouse, which once belonged to Peter Willits. And I know that Mindful Lotus is a development company. So it doesn't take much to connect his estate to Mindful Lotus, which you told me had no connection whatsoever." "And what do you expect from me?" she said, completely unimpressed with my perfect logic. "Somewhere along the line in any business, there's got to be an attorney. And in this case, all roads lead to you." Nancy Drew sank back comfortably in her big leather armchair. "An imagination like yours can be trouble, because sometimes it hits on the truth," Nancy Drew sneered. I said, "Do you know who killed Augusta Willits?" She shifted her body in the chair. No, she said. What about Adolf Doberman? She shook her head impatiently. Mr. Kraychik, I'm a very busy person. I suspect Herr Doberman was part of a business deal that went sour. Idle speculation. I saw you with him and Edsel Sham twice. And don't tell me both times were just social occasions. Then I saw you with Joshua 18 last night. And I know that Joshua is driving Edsel now. And Edsel leads me back to you. Except now there's no more Adolf. Nancy L. Drew leaned forward in her chair. She seemed to grow larger as she did, like those animals that swell up to ward off imminent threats. You are wasting my time, she said. If you don't leave here immediately, I'm going to call the police. Go right ahead. Ask for Lieutenant Sanfuentes. She picked up the telephone and punched in a number. When the other side answered, Nancy L. Drew told them who she was and that she required urgent assistance at her office, and that she was being harassed by a trespasser. Mind you, I was paying the woman. And then she looked me over and added that the trespasser was probably unarmed. She thanked the person, then hung up. It was all done with cool, professional decorum. I said, if I didn't know better, I'd say you just called anyone but the police. We watched each other silently while I listened for the wail of a police siren outside. I wonder, I said, are you keeping secrets out of professional confidence? Or are you afraid you might be next in line? For what? 2 people have been killed. Why should anyone want to kill me? Said Nancy L. Drew. You tell me. She looked at me wearily as though she was considering whether she could trust me. Perhaps all those years I'd spent at the styling chair had given me a trustworthy aura, a halo of light that encouraged people to let down their guard with me and tell the real dirt, even lawyers. What are you afraid of? I said. Nothing, she said quickly. That can be perilous, I said. Is it Edsel? Kin? The Countess? Nancy Drew said, look, I don't know where you came from or why you're here, but I'm not telling you anything. Now, please leave before they come. Please, for your own good. There was an urgency in her voice that alerted me as though she really was warning me for my own good. I'm not afraid of the police, I said. It's not the police you should be afraid of, she said. I got up and went to the door. Thanks for the tip, I said. I got out of the building fast and headed for the Alpha. Just then, a bright red Range Rover came tearing into the parking lot, all 4 new tires squealing. It jolted to a stop with no attempt to park properly. I braced myself to confront Ken Kimball, my would-be attacker, in expensive sunglasses. He was ripping mad as he came toward me, but then he raced right by, barely acknowledging me. He obviously wasn't the person Nancy L. Drew had summoned to oust me. No, Ken Kimball looked as though he had other urgent business there, and he was very angry. So angry that he might tell me things he wasn't supposed to. Well, a quell's surprise for Nancy L. Drew. Then instead of scampering off her property in fright, I would instead pursue Ken Kimball to soothe his savage beast. Hi, I said cordially, once I'd caught up with him. Yes, he said as he tried to rush away from me. I kept putting myself halfway in his path and gave him my earnest therapist look, the one that never worked in the psych clinic but always worked at the styling chair. You seem upset, Ken. You have no idea, he said. I've just come from town hall. What happened? I have to see my lawyer, he said. Maybe if you talk to me, you can dissipate some of your anger. I don't want to dissipate it, he said. Anger isn't good, I said therapeutically. It will only weaken your message. I struggled to control my gag reflex. Damn, Ed, said Ken. Damn that coward. Do you know what he did? Tell me, Ken. There we were in town hall together, along with a noisy mob of irate residents, all of us trying to get to the bottom of the mutilation taking place at the Gulf Coast Playhouse. And finally, after trying to make sense to those damn bureaucrats, we got beyond the office that dispensed the building permits. Ed and I actually got behind closed doors and found out who's behind this whole thing. Mindful Lotus, I said. And that stopped his tirade. He pulled off his sunglasses. Where'd you hear about that? I shrugged. You talk to enough people, you'll hear just about everything. Well, it's only a name, he said quickly. Though a badly chosen one, almost blasphemous considering their wanton abuse of the reef. What's more important was to find out how they got permission to build in spite of federal restrictions. And that's exactly when Ed bowed out. He told me that we should surrender when facing a power greater than ourselves. Who is it? I said. But I will not surrender. I will fight this to the death if I have to. Who is it? I said again. Ken looked at me. His eyes were murderous when he spoke. The judge, he said. It was that same judge who decided for Augusta Willits when she contested her son Peter's will. It was the same judge who defeated Nancy Drew when she represented Peter's estate. And you're interested in it? I added. Yes, spat Ken. It was the same judge who, as the executor of Augusta's estate, sold the Gulf Coast Playhouse to Mindful Lotus. It was the same judge who then allowed them the building permit that is now destroying the Gulf Coast Playhouse. Isn't there a conflict of interest in there somewhere? Ah! Said Ken Kimball. More than one, I assure you. Does this judge have a name? What does that matter? Said Ken. He's gone now. Fled town weeks ago. Isn't that nice? A pious coward shits in your face and runs off with his share of the profits. But they'll find him. Who will? Spat Ken. The police, the FBI, the authorities. Ken laughed. How naive, he said. Who knows better how to evade the strong arm of the law than a clever judge? No, my dear foolish thing. That man is gone forever, I'm afraid, and we are left with the detritus of his machinations. I almost applauded, but Ken, bad actor that he was, couldn't leave the dramatic beat alone. And to think he was a deacon of a church. I reminded him that particular stamp of approval was pretty much defunct these days. Then I asked, what can be done now? That's exactly what I intend to confront Attorney Drew with, I said. She's not going to help you. She's involved with Mindful Lotus herself. What? Nancy L. Drew is part of the corporation that now controls Peter Willits' estate. She can't be, said Ken. Go ask her. But Nancy is on the board of the Key West Society for Historical Preservation. The Gulf Coast Playhouse is part of a heritage that must be preserved at all cost. If what you say is true, she has violated our trust. We may have to sue her to have her debarred. To save the Playhouse. What else matters? Said Ken. What about your inheritance from Peter's estate? My first concern is to save the theater and the reef. Good luck, I said. And off he went to slay the dragon called Nancy L. Drew. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.